we can get started. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is S. Famajere, and I'm the program manager for the Female Founders Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great fireside chat with our partners over at Georgian. We're going to talk about creating a roadmap for you to utilize AI. So, this is a very particular topic, so I'm sure you all are very interested. And thank you so much if you submitted questions that really helped form this conversation. And so your questions will probably be answered today. But yeah, again, this is supposed to be interactive. If you have questions throughout the presentation, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We will keep track of those and make sure they get answered as well. But yeah, so let me get to introduce you to our speakers for today. And get that up. All right. So today, again, we have our two partners. And please forgive me if I mispronounce things. I meant to check in with pronunciations beforehand. But we're here with Parinaz Sobhani, and she is the head of machine learning and applied research at Georgian. And she's with their research and development team and is responsible for leading the development of cutting edge machine learning solutions for growth stage startup companies. Also, she works on solving natural language understanding problems using deep neural networks techniques. She has more than 10 years of experience in developing and designing new models and algorithms for various artificial intelligence tasks. So you're in good hands today. And she is also joined by a moderator, Madison Elkhazin, who is an investor at Georgian. So we know we got some investor kind of questions today, so she can handle those. And at Georgian, she supports deal selections, due diligence, and post-investment value and initiatives across research and development, product strategy, operations, and finance. So I'm sure they'll talk a little bit more about their experience as well. But again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Pari and Madison.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the intro, S, and so nice to meet you all. I love to see that everyone's dialing in from different locations. I'll let Pari introduce herself in a second, but we're from Toronto. I'm currently hiding out in Cancun, Mexico. I know some of you are probably a bit jealous on the call, but from Toronto, we'll give a little bit of an intro. As S mentioned, I'm an investor on the investment team here at Georgian. Have been here for about 2.5 years, focused predominantly on our net new growth deals, and have recently been working on the investor side, working with some of our LPs on fundraising. We're currently, thinking about how we expand our platforms. Within the investment team, I focus on all things software efficiency metrics, due diligence, product strategy, market research, etc. And I'm so thankful to work with such amazing and intelligent women such as Pari. So I'll pass it over to her for a quick intro.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a great day so far. I'm also calling from Toronto, north of Toronto. I wish I was in Cancun, but I'm not. I wish I was somewhere as beautiful as my background, but I'm not. And my background is technical, machine learning, computer science. I worked for a few research labs, and I realized I'm so passionate about startup ecosystem, and I have no idea. You can't imagine how ignorant I was. But meanwhile, I was approached by Georgian, and I found it a very unique opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and really accelerating their growth. And they normally don't have access to people like me. And it's very meaningful for me to be part of their journey. At the same time, I have the investors' lenses, and I can learn a lot about startup ecosystem as well. So it's been an amazing journey the last 5 years, and I learned a lot. I learned to be more pragmatic. I learned to be a simplifier. When you're working with a smaller organization, you have to simplify everything as much as possible, and always think about what can bring the most value to the business.
Awesome. Cool. So today, I know you submitted a few questions. We're going to give a quick overview on Georgian. We'll then dive into some of the AI specific questions. And as S mentioned, any additional questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll be moderating the chat. And if anything comes up that is related to what we're talking about, we'll make sure to cover that as well. And then after, we'll show you some of our contact information if you want to get in touch with us. And we've taken a few snippets from our due diligence process on how we evaluate companies, and also a snapshot of an AI workshop that we typically take some of our newer companies through. So maybe I'll just get started with a quick overview on Georgian. So Georgian is a fintech company that invests in high growth technology companies. And our main focus is we look for companies that harness the power of data in a trustworthy way. So I'm sure you've seen in the venture capital ecosystem, most companies are out there writing checks and adding value through things like operations and go-to-market intros. At Georgian, we are a software company that just so happens to invest in other companies. We build software internally to help automate some of our own internal processes, and anything that we learn that benefits our portfolio companies, we then open source either that toolkit or that methodology or that piece of software to our portfolio companies. So we help them with things like lead qualification or automated M&A targeting. We do tons of advisory engagements that Pari we'll talk about in a second. We do hackathons, and we technically act as an extended R&D team for some of our portfolio companies. So a little bit about Georgian. We were founded in 2008 by 3X software owner operators. We've raised roughly $3 billion across 6 funds. 5 of those funds are growth funds, where we invest in net new growth stage companies. And the newest addition to that platform is called our Alignment Fund, which essentially is a platform that allows us to double down in our winners and companies that are already in our portfolio. We've invested in roughly 60 companies to date. The majority of those companies are in the US. We have about 22% in Canada, and we do have a company in Tel Aviv and also a company in the UK. Aside from our growth funds and our alignment funds, we also have something called the Georgian CoLab. You can think of that as, as a software company, kind of like our freemium VC offering, where companies that might be too early for Georgian or they're simply not raising yet, get access to some of the value add offerings that Georgian has before we invest. So it's kind of like the try before you buy thing. We host webinars. You can join office hours with some of our AI experts, such as Pari. We host a few workshops, and it's just a great way for us to build a relationship with you and for you to build a relationship with us and see, if a partnership makes sense. So by the time you're at our mandate or by the time you come to raise, we already know each other, and it's a very simple process. As I mentioned before, our main value add is through our fintech platform, through product acceleration. We also have our Georgian Growth Network, which is an exclusive community of all of the executives in our portfolio. They get to learn from each other. Folks like myself and Pari might pop in to help out with the community, but the Georgian team is not actually active in that community. If you're a CFO of a company that sells to banks, there's another CFO of a company that sells to banks, you probably are going through very common challenges. So the platform is a way for those two CEOs to connect with each other, ask questions, share information, and share knowledge. So we have working groups such as the CFO community. We have the CISO community for security experts. We also have communities such as selling to banks, so that folks who sell into the same industries can either share deal flow or learn from each other. As I mentioned before, we don't just invest in AI companies. We are an AI company, and we've taken that, to our internal sourcing methodology. Typically at other venture funds, you'd have a bench of analysts who are cold calling CEOs and scouring LinkedIn and trying to find your usernames and hoping that you take a call with them. We actually have an AI and almost like a lead targeting and lead sourcing platform called Spring, that ranks companies based on the likelihood that Georgian would invest in them. So it might not be, the best company ever because we don't invest in consumer, but it's the best fit for Georgian, the best B2B enterprise company that is harnessing data and in a trustworthy way. And we have 74 employees, and almost everybody is based in Toronto. So the types of companies that we look for, we focus on North American companies who are B2B enterprise software platforms. The stage that we typically target is about 6 million in ARR, growing about 150% year over year. We look for top quartile SaaS metrics and financial predictability. And At the end of the discussion, I'll show you what that means for us. And as I mentioned before, we focus on trust in AI, and we look for companies where trust in AI is rooted in their product and culture. If they haven't been able to exploit AI yet, we look for what we like to call data motability. So they have access to proprietary data, and we can help them figure out how to use that data to either automate parts of their product or augment parts of their product. We look for companies that have leadership positions in large, disruptive, and fast-growing markets, digital disruptors, category creators, or platforms that are able to quickly gain market share in upcoming technology replacement cycles. So things like core banking. So that's just a little bit of focus on what Georgian looks at, and a bit of an overview on Georgian. So maybe I'll pass it off to Pari to see if there's anything that I missed or anything she'd like to add.
It was perfect.
Thank you. Awesome. So maybe we'll jump into the AI discussion, because there were some great questions that were asked. I'm just going to pull up the question list here. So Pari, maybe I'll pass it over to you, and we can start with, there we go. So one of the founders asked, how do you prep the grounds to implement AI? Specifically, if you're a very early stage company, and you may not have AI in your product today, but you're hoping to incorporate it into your roadmap.
Great question. I think we all know the main ingredient for AI is data, and we all heard about data quality problems. It's not only we all heard about garbage in, garbage out. So what you can do now is make sure your data has certain level of quality, consistency, and you have the mechanism to log what matters for those models later on. And sometimes it's very hard, and we end up logging too much data, or so that's why maybe another foundation piece will be around really figuring out what type of problems you want to solve, and you might even start with some sort of rule-based techniques right now, but really figuring out what would be the current processes that you like to augment or even automate, and what would be the potential data sources that can be helpful for that automation or augmentation. And also figuring out the kind of data schema, data modeling, data infrastructure, and even some thoughts around the integration piece. You're going to have all these models, but how do you want to surface the predictions or the outcome of these models to the end users? How do you want to integrate it with the current platform? How do you want to integrate it with the other products or services you have? That's another piece that, even if it's like a simple mock-up, that you're going to work together with your designers, and just having it here now, it's going to help you as you're thinking about the UI UX of your products, how it can be integrated with machine learning, data science, and AI. So I would summarize it: data and data and data. That then thinking about the problems. But and that's a kind of maybe the most important one, the type of problems that you already see in your industry that people have been approached, people have been approached in solving them using machine learning and AI. So it can be based on the competitive landscape as well. And then the last piece is around integration and UI and UX. And I forgot one of the most important ones, data rights. So it's also about even if you have the data and even you can collect and capture and log that data, do you have the rights to really leverage data for the purposes of training your models? Or for example, if you want to go even one step beyond that and really get benefit out of cross-customer data aggregation, do you have the rights or not? And even start working on your contracts or start having the conversations with your customers. And it's a very delicate subject, because at the same time, you want to be mindful of their security and privacy concerns. So really trying to get the requirements from them. How can you make them comfortable sharing their data? And what kind of guarantees you need to provide For example, again, there are so many technologies that can help you. One of them is, for example, differential privacy or federated learning, but there are so many other technologies that they can provide some level of guarantees on the privacy and security of the data that you're going to aggregate across customers. So that might be another discussion that you can have it now. And it really depends if you're especially a B2B company other than B2C company, and you have this kind of multi-instance architecture, and you have all these siloed machine learning and data bases for each customer, then it's another kind of concern around what's the meaning of data mode for my problem. Because if it's a B2C, it's much easier. You might have more users, that's a network effect. If it's a B2B and you need to have, because of the security and privacy reasons and because of your instance architecture, you need to have these silos, then what's the benefit of that aggregation? I'm bringing more customers, what's the benefit? So that's why you need to also think about maybe down the road, if you need to do that, if you need to get benefit out of that kind of data mode, what kind of rights do you need to have?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know, we help quite a few of our portfolio companies restructure their MSAs to ensure that they have the data rights required to build AI products. Because the truth is, if your customers don't really trust you with their data, you're likely not going to extract all the value you can from automation and AI. Which brings us to another question. I'll probably generalize it a little bit, but what are some of the top privacy related concerns that some of our companies have faced when they're thinking about developing an AI roadmap?
Very good question. And I'm not the best security and privacy experts, but again, based on my knowledge of our companies. So basically, there is definitely more awareness from the end users, or even in the consumer world, more awareness around privacy. And what do you know about me? How do you use those information about me? And how does it impact? And what's the value for me? Because that's the most important one. So I know you have certain information about me, and I know you might use it in a certain way. What's the value for me? And it's going to take me to a fair exchange of value. So it's about, we can do some sort of anonymization. For example, we are not going to record any demographic information, or even if we are recording them for various reasons, we're never going to use them in our machine learning models. That's one level of kind of comfort that you can give to your customers, or to the customers of your customers, if you're more a B2B company. And the next level of comfort is around what is even one level more advanced is, okay, these machine learning models, we're going to use them, and we're going to use your data to train these models. And what does it mean? It means that if someone gets access to these models, might be able to back engineering it and get access to my data. Can you provide some level of comfort for me, or some level of guarantee that these models, these black box models, that we call them black box, but they are not black box, there is no way for them to back engineer those models and get access to my data? That's another level of comfort you can provide. And then last one is around, what is the value for me? I'm using your data to train these models, and it can provide more personalization, customization, or it can solve some of the problems, or it can automate some of the kind of routine work you have to do. That's the value that I'm bringing for you. If it's more in the context of B2B settings, and as we talked around cross-customer aggregation, again, this is going to be a question mark for them. If I'm sharing my data with potentially one of my competitors, what's the value for me? And it's about how you can really translate the value in a language that is understandable and accessible. For example, I can improve the performance of my models by 20%. What does it mean? It means it can reduce your cost by certain percent. It means that it can bring certain revenue for you. And it's going to be win-win. You all going to benefit from it, but definitely it's going to be a win-win scenario.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that brings up an interesting point about, the training data needed to have good AI. You can have all the customer data rights in the world and, the best quality of data in, but how do you really think about, training the data and training the models to really have a good algorithm output that is, usable by end users. And I think a second point to that somebody asked is, there's a huge conversation about bias in AI and bias in training data. As you talk about, the type of training data someone needs to have, good algorithm, can you also touch on the topic of bias and how we should think about eliminating bias when training algorithms?
Really good questions. I can talk about these two types of problems. One of them, like, well, how much data do we need forever? And I think maybe the best analogy gonna be, it's like, I want to be the best swimmer. I want to be the best person. I want to really learn skiing. How much time I have to spend to learn skiing? It really depends on you. It really depends on how difficult the task or the new skill set that you want to develop. So how much data do you need depends on the complexity of the problem. That's the simplest answer. And it also depends on, do you want to be the best swimmer, or it's okay for you to just learn how to float on the water. So it also depends on the level of performance that you're looking for. And the level of performance should come from, like, what is the ideal level? Something different from what is the actual requirements from your customers or the end users. And whether it's an augmentation or automation. For example, if it's the augmentation and human in the loop, we can tolerate more errors. If it's full automation, and if it's a critical task that you are automating, then definitely the requirements are higher. If it's, for example, a recommendation engine, and the cost of a wrong prediction or wrong recommendation is not as much, because you can provide hundreds of recommendations to your end users every day, then yeah, we can tolerate more errors. So it really depends on the complexity of the problem, the level of performance that is required from your customer's perspective. And even if the best way is to do experimentation. There is no way that I can tell you for this problem how much data do you need. You have to do some experimentation to really understand the complexity of the problem from the mathematical optimization perspective. You can imagine, if it's a very complex problem, then you definitely need more data. And of course, it's not only about the quantity of the data, it's also about the quality of the data. Going back to the first question, what you need as a foundation is making sure you have the quality of data is there. So it's not only about the quantity, it's also about the quality of the data. And then to train any machine learning models, you have to think about the input and the outcome. You might have the input, but you might not have the outcome. For some of the tasks or processes or problems, you can actually close the feedback loop and actually have the outcome. But for some of them, you might not. And if you don't have the outcome, then the other problem that you have to think about is, can I use crowdsourcing, or can I hire some analysts to actually label data for me? And that might be another problem that you have to consider. And the cost, of course, to your business if you can't really close the feedback loop. And speaking of bias, again, it's a very important problem. And of course, it really depends on the context, and it really depends on the problem you're solving. For some of the problems, it's definitely more important to think about all potential biases you might introduce to your system and to your machine learning models. For some of them, it might be less critical, at least for the initial version of the model. So context is the key. Remember to try, and again, I'm glad that we are all female, and some of them are even like people of color. So bringing more perspective to the problem solving is very important, because there are going to be some type of biases that there is no way for us to think about if we don't bring the kind of more perspective to the kind of discussions. That's one of them. The other one is, there is no way to oversimplify the problem, the bias problem. So it's definitely much more complicated than removing the demographic information from your data, because there are correlation between these demographic information and so many other behavioral data that we are collecting from our customers or end users. So that's why there is no way to oversimplify. It's okay, I'm fine. I'm not using your gender in my data, so I'm fine. I'm sure my model cannot be sexist. It's not the case. The example that I use is imagine that you are using in your data which social media they use the most. And if the answer is Pinterest with more than 80%, it's a white woman. So it's just like, I'm not using any demographic information, but still I have a feature or attribute that is such a strong indicator of the gender and race. And again, you have to think about who you are serving. For example, I'm serving people of color for medical diagnosis. And if it's the case, your data should be representative of that population. And it's not an easy problem because you might not easily find sources of data for that population. And some of them is more long-term initiatives. Okay, I'm going to start collecting more data about kind of medical history of people of color, but it's going to take time. It's not like something that you can do overnight. Then what's the best way? The best way is to transparently communicate that this is the blind spot of your model. And it's going to take time for you to fill that gap. But transparency is the key. Transparently communicate with your end users that this is the blind spot. The model might make more errors for that population. So they have to be cautious when they are using the predictions of these models.
Awesome. Yeah, it's such an important conversation. And I know that's one that we always have internally. And, we brought in speakers to address this topic. I believe we actually have a podcast on the Georgian website that addresses some points that you covered here. And you also mentioned a very important point about bringing different perspectives around the table when you're thinking about developing these models or talking about the type of training data required. That brings up an interesting point around hiring. Say you're an early stage company, you're starting to think about ways to automate your product or introduce more AI. Can you briefly touch upon some of the best hiring practices that founders should follow and how to determine that critical first data science hire to bring on the team?
Great question. And it's very hard. It's a very difficult hire because data scientists, we are referring to so many different types of responsibilities as data scientist responsibilities. So it's very hard to actually looking at like what is available over the web as like type of responsibility. It really depends on your kind of problems and your priorities and where you are in your maturity of building data science. Imagine that you are very early and you don't have anybody. So definitely you need someone pragmatic, because if you bring someone who's more excited about technology rather than impact, you're not going to make any progress. You should bring someone who is driven by actually creating value for the business and actually creating value for your own end users as well. Then also thinking about bringing in more full stack person, someone who is good at engineering, data analysis, passionate to learn more about the business and problem and product, as well as doing the modeling and the science piece. And it's going to be very hard because we are talking about ninjas and there are not as many of them out there. Then it's going to be about the kind of compromises at the end of the day. For your context, for your problem, for your business, more important to bring someone who can easily learn about the business, product, and the market? Or is it more important to bring someone with stronger engineering background? Or no, I actually have a very good engineers. I can pair them with those engineers and they can quickly learn. So engineering is not a must for me. The pragmatism plus science and knowing about these kind of modelings and analytics techniques going to be more important for me. So thinking about three main pillars when you're bringing a data scientist to your business. One of them is product and business, the other one is engineering, and the last one is science. And at the end of the day, if you can't find a ninja, most likely you can't, then you have to have very clear priorities in terms of which of them is more important for the current state of the team.
Awesome. So I guess maybe pivoting a bit here, one of the founders asked an interesting question around, as you think about building your full product roadmap, should the AI roadmap be encompassed within that broader product or portfolio roadmap, or should it almost be a separate, roadmap that you're kind of building in parallel?
From my perspective, it should be pretty much embedded in the actual product, like the actual company's product roadmap. It shouldn't be a siloed. And most of the failures we had so far, because we siloed machine learning and data science as those magicians that are going to spend most of their time figuring out what they can get out of data for us. And please, 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 please forget about the bottom-up approach. Try to think what is the best way to think about your business, processes you own, your customer journey, the workflows, any typical standard product management process. And then AI and machine learning is one of the technologies out there, out of many other technologies, that can also help you. And don't be so biased, oh, actually AI is hot, I have to force something to my business by using AI. It's not going to be the case. And again, be super pragmatic. Even if you find an opportunity for personalization, for example, try to think about a very simple rule-based technique that can help you to quickly do some sort of A/B testing or quickly experiment with it to see what's the value, what's the reaction of your users, and be able to somehow quantify the ROI. It's been one of the kind of hardest problems for us to really work on the ROI cases and the models for the AI products, because there are going to be so many assumptions, but don't overthink about it. So try to find the simplest possible assumptions and put it together a scrappy back of napkin ROI case for your AI products or AI opportunities. And based on that, see if it's a priority for now or 2 years from now or 3 years from now, or if you have the foundation now, which is the data most likely, and of course the skills, or you have to wait because you are not there yet. And of course, the market competition is also the other aspects of it. In your market, everybody has AI and machine learning and it's a table stake, then yeah, you might not have any other choices. But if it's not happening in your market, of course, there's actually an opportunity for you to have that kind of product differentiation, but maybe there is not that much urgency to do it now.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty common mistake that early stage companies, or even some of our companies, maybe even us internally, have faced, running AI and data science in a silo. What are some other common mistakes that you would mention founders should probably try to avoid when thinking about incorporating AI into their roadmap?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the most common one is treating opportunity identification as a bottom-up problem. It's not going to be the case. It should be a top-up. And then the other one is if you don't have a very good understanding of the opportunities, but still you believe you have access to a very unique data mode, bring a PM. I guess one of the maybe most common mistakes is that they have 2 engineers, 3 scientists, and they are all scrambling to figure out exactly what kind of problems, but there is no product management kind of structure or thinking that can help them to really identify the opportunity. So that's another one that sometimes we've been working for a year or so, and we thought that we are solving a problem that matters the most to the end users or customers, but we ended up deploying it and didn't see that much adoption. And the last one is, again, integration and trust. Educating your customers or end users. Are they comfortable with full automation? If they are not comfortable and you want to start with augmentation, and you're going to have human in the loop, and it's going to be about interactions between the machine and or the machine learning models and these people, and how they can build that relationship of trust. For example, is explainability is one of the requirements of your products or not? or your models or not. For example, you have to somehow communicate what is the rationality behind the predictions or the decisions of these models. And that's going to help the end users or the human in the loop to build that relationship of trust. That's another one. So adoption, in general, is a very important problem to think about, or go to market. And you have to think about it in advance. It's going to be too late. If you build the product and ready to integrate it with your platform, and you really don't know what would be the reaction. You really don't know if it's going to get that level of adoption or not.
Awesome. Yeah, you touched on another question that one of the founders asked here that we've been talking about internally as well around the notion of trust. And the question here is more focused on best practices when motivating users to opt in for a more personalized user experience. We're seeing it now on our iPhones. You open a new app and Apple asks you if you want the app to track you or ask the app not to track you for a more targeted and personalized experience with the app or advertising around that app. So what would your advice be around really building trust with the end user and allowing and enabling them to want to opt in to drive more personalization?
Great question. And it's all about communicating the value in a language that is accessible. For example, if Apple tell me that if I have some level of customization on your keypad when you're texting your friends, or I don't know, word suggestion or auto completion, and it's going to make you 50% faster when you're texting or messaging, or if Gmail tell me that I'm going to make you 60% more efficient when you're responding to your emails or writing a new emails, it's going to be much easier for me to opt in rather than saying I'm going to provide some level of personalization, but I really don't know what's the value. Okay, personalized, but what does it mean for me? How does it change my day-to-day? But if I tell you I can save 2 hours per day, and you can use that 2 hours to do things that matters the most, then it's, we are all struggling with time. Then it's really meaningful. If I can tell you that I'm going to augment you, and most likely I'm going to help you with your decision making, and it's going to make your decisions 10%, 20% more accurate, then it's really meaningful for me. But just I'm using AI because it's cool, it's not meaningful. And even technology doesn't matter. It's more about what you can solve, what you can bring, what kind of value you can bring, rather than what is the technology. Even if it's a set of rules that actually help me to be 20% more efficient, that's enough for me. I really don't care if it's AI or rules.
Awesome. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation for sure happening right now around, companies requesting us to opt in for more personalized experiences, but not actually communicating how that personalization is going to benefit us. So it seems like the main focus here is communicating the value in a way that your end users are really going to understand it. Awesome. So now we only have about 15 minutes left, and I want to get through a few of the other questions and also leave some time for open Q&A. This is an interesting one, a little bit specific, but it touches on something that I think we help our companies think through all the time, and it's the notion of customization. So one of the founders asked, what are some of the suggested best practices when building customized enterprise B2B SaaS APIs that include an AI component? How do you create a repeatable process that scales? And I know specific to these APIs that include AI, but it's interesting enough that a lot of our companies, specifically in the enterprise segment, do struggle with this notion of customization and how to create repeatable processes that scale across their customer base. Is that something that you can touch on for the founders on the call?
Yeah, I remember last year there was a podcast or actual blog post as well in A16Z. And it was about maybe we are dealing with completely different types of companies when we are talking about AI companies, and maybe we have to reconsider how we look at their financial metrics, especially gross margin, because there's going to be some element of services and customization, and it's different from SaaS. And I'm talking about like AI company, not a SaaS company who's using AI to augment or automate some of the processes. And then we are dealing with completely different data sets from one customer to another data set. The distributions are different. It means that you have to spend so much of time, of valuable time of your data scientists to actually figure out the best model, the best features, the quality, the kind of noise in data that you have to really learn. And it means there are going to be some element of services, no matter what's the current infrastructure in support of automating some of these processes, but still we are not there to fully automate it and put it in autopilot. I think there's going to be some element of customization, at least based on the current state of the technology, and you have to get comfortable with it. But there are also some benefits out of transfer learning. For example, next time you have a new customer, you don't need to start from scratch. Maybe you can use one of the existing models and don't wait for 6 months to collect enough data to be able to train a model. But again, it depends on your data rights. And of course, the privacy guarantees or some level of what we call de-anonymization or adding noise to the model so that there is no way to backtrack the model. But definitely there are different ways that you can get benefits out of transfer learning. You can get benefits out of pre-trained models. For example, if you're dealing with NLP type of problems, natural language understanding or text data, there are so many available pre-trained models. So some of the, and they are, what do we mean by pre-trained models? As humans, there are some common sense for us. For example, this is the structure of semantic or syntactic structure of a sentence. What does it mean to have a tree? What's the relationship between a tree and garden? So these are like common sense. And normally you have to teach a model these kind of common sense, you have to throw lots of data to these models. And now big companies like Google or some other open source communities like Hugging Face, they have spent so much time and of course money to train these huge pre-trained models that they already have the common sense. And you can easily use them and fine-tune them for your own tasks or problems. Then you don't need to have as much data, you don't need to spend as much of your data scientist time or engineers time. That's another way of thinking about how you can really figure out the efficiency piece and leveraging what's out there plus what you are in unique position to have access to.
Awesome. Awesome. I know, one thing that we talk about when we're looking at companies that leverage customization is the ability to, if you're building some customized feature set for one customer, how do you integrate that into your product roadmap so that everybody gets access to that new feature that has been built? That's, one thing that we've definitely focused on during diligence. And that's something that we've helped our companies think through a few of our advisory engagements, which kind of brings us to one of the last questions that I'll ask you around what it's like working with Georgian as a portfolio company with your team around some of the R&D engagements that we do with some of our companies.
Great question. This is my favorite question because I get the chance to talk about our team. So as I told you, I'm so passionate about solving problems using machine learning and AI. And it's very rewarding experience working with entrepreneurs. And definitely depends on where you are in your journey. And we try to tailor our offerings to companies that they are in different stages of their journey. If they are earlier, we can help them with that kind of opportunity identification, reviewing all their workflows and a user kind of processes to figure out what are the best opportunities, help them to build the ROI cases and be able to communicate and showcase the value of the AI and machine learning, helping them building the teams. That's another aspect of it. And then what is our main differentiation is actually how we help our companies to execute on the plan. So okay, this is a roadmap for your AI products, but it's not going to be one of those investors like this is a roadmap. Go work on it, and we're going to come back in 1 year and ask you where you are and how much progress you made. We have a very different approach. We're going to be very embedded in your team. We're going to work very closely with your technical leaders. We're going to be the augmentation of your resources. We're going to bring our own expertise to the table because we've been working with companies similar to you, and we are pretty familiar with type of problems and challenges you might face. And then hopefully we can accelerate the go-to-market and the execution piece. So we have different types of offering. One of them is hackathon, and the other one is deep engagement. Hackathons are like very intense, a few weeks, but very fun for teams. Also, the goal is as your team working closely with our team, they can also learn how to build and how to train models and how to develop similar systems. And then deeper engagements are normally a few quarters that we're gonna again be very embedded in your team and work very closely with your engineers and scientists to deliver the MVP. That's it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess, another thing I wanted to take the team through today is if specifically for our companies that are a little bit earlier in their AI journey, or who may be part of our collab program that I was talking about earlier, meaning you're not at our mandate yet. We typically look for companies that are doing about 1 million in annual recurring revenue. Again, focus is B2B SaaS. We typically take them through this AI workshop that we facilitate through Miro, to help them really prioritize, as Pari was saying earlier, should you start off with augmentation or full automation, and what are your use cases, who are you targeting, and which AI opportunities should you prioritize first. So if you are, a B2B SaaS company, you're on track to hit 1 million in ARR, please do reach out to us and we'll get you onboarded into the collab offering. Here is our contact information, and this will be sent out after. If you'd like to follow up with Pari, her email is there. Please CC Lorena, her executive business partner. My contact information is there. Again, please CC Maggie. They'll make sure we get some time scheduled, and we'll also introduce you to Connor, who leads our collab program. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and I've also included our Twitter at the bottom as well. So like I mentioned, this AI workshop is part of the collab offering, and we have tons of resources on our website about how to scale up your machine learning team, and different elements you should consider around AI and trust. I know we only have about 5 minutes left, but I wanted to take 2 minutes to quickly walk you through how Georgian evaluates companies, because that tends to be a question that we get quite frequently, and one of the questions that we had here. So we look at companies across 6 different lenses. The first one is investment thesis fit. We spent quite a bit of time talking about that today. So what is your potential for AI, machine learning, and trust? What are the opportunities that we can use to support you along that journey, and work together? We look for quality and completeness of the management team, meaning, do they have deep domain expertise? Do you have that critical CRO, CFO roles filled in addition to your technical team? Predictability of the business model. As I mentioned, we typically invest in companies that are doing around 6 million in ARR plus. That tends to be either, late B, early C stage, but in today's market, there are Series A companies raising $200 million at $1 billion valuation. So maybe I won't comment on stage. I'll just say at least 6 million in ARR. How predictable is your machine? Meaning, what are your retention metrics? What have they looked like over the past 8 quarters? How many customers have come up for renewal? Of those customers, how many have renewed? So we can, get a feel for how predictable your gross dollar, net dollar, and gross logo retention is. We look for growth rate and profitability. I would say 99% of the companies we invest in are not profitable, but they do have a path to profitability within our investment horizon, which tends to be 5-year hold period. And again, I mentioned we're looking for companies that are doing over 150% year-over-year growth. Valuation is a big thing. I know we're all talking about the Tiger Globals in the world that are dropping down $1.2 billion valuations and off 2 million of revenue in 24 hours. But a big piece for us is really understanding the price, and ensuring that, that's something that the team feels comfortable with, we feel comfortable with, and it is in line with, the last round, aligned with market comps, precedent transactions. But we're also looking at, a lot of the engagements that Pari talked about in production can generate hundreds of millions of dollars worth of value. So say we're placing a valuation on your company today, we also build the Georgian plus R&D case. So if we align on a product or extension of your current AI roadmap that we can help you with, if that generates, say, $400 million of value, how does that impact the company's enterprise value? And that's really how we think about the Georgian plus R&D case when we think about price. And the last one is obviously product and market. We're looking at market size. We're looking at the quality of your product and product team and the ability for the product to either capture market share very quickly, as I mentioned, in upcoming replacement cycles, or are you a digital disruptor? Are you a category creator? Do you have a proprietary data moat, some type of first mover advantage? That's a big lens that we look at. This is kind of what a typical product market scorecard looks like, how we're evaluating things like the market size and growth, the velocity of that market. Are there any adjacencies? For example, could an adjacent market come and overtake this market? Is there a lot of consolidation happening in this space? Or is it really being won by point solutions? The value and time, customer time to value, what is the position in that market? Stickiness and mission criticality, which tends to be backed by your predictability metrics. If you have tons of customers that are always renewing, very high net dollar retention, that tends to mean that you have a very sticky and mission critical product. Do you have a competitive data moat, maybe one that we can exploit using AI and machine learning? And what are some of the dependencies? Is there a gray or black swan in the market that could happen? Say, you are in a market that is heavily reliant on Apple, Google, Facebook regulations. Well, there could definitely be a black swan event that happens, and Apple and Google shut down some type of your data access, and then it's a struggle for you to continue accelerating your product. So those are some of the product and market lenses that we look at. And the other one that I mentioned is around software efficiency metrics, unit economics, and financial predictability. So this is what our G7 scorecard looks like. That means the 7 most important SaaS metrics from Jordan's perspective for high growth software companies. So we're looking at ARR growth. We're looking at your burn. CAC payback is a huge one. Gross dollar retention, net dollar retention, your capital efficiency ratio, meaning how much capital have you consumed in order to get to the ARR scale that you're at, and months to cash zero. So when do you need to raise again? These are the 7 metrics that we analyze for all of our portfolio companies and pipeline companies, benchmarked against hundreds of different data points from IPO data for the most successful software companies, Georgian's internal portfolio companies, and dozens of software venture capital surveys as well. So all of this is in the deck if you want to take a look at some of those vectors. So maybe now I will pass it back to the team and see if anybody has any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Pari and Madison. This was very informative and just wealth of information and knowledge and even insight into Georgian as a company as well. We really appreciate that. So we have, we're at time, but also there's an opportunity to connect with Madison and Pari. They left their contact information, and a few days from now, we will be sending a follow-up email to all registrants that has a replay of this. So if you miss anything or want to revisit some of the questions that they answered, we have that available for you. And also their deck will be sent in that email as well. So you can have that information. And also it's in the chat right now. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. Also on FFA side, we have our summit coming up October 13th through the 15th. So you can check on our website under our events page for more information on that. And I think that's it. So you all have a great day.